One man stood in the gate of a village nobody could find on a map, and he said the word that could get a man killed. Nineveh would fall. The bloody city, the terror of every nation on earth, gone in a single night. The men in the road laughed at him because Nineveh's walls ran wide enough for 3 chariots to ride abreast, and no army alive had ever broken them. You would have laughed too. Stand there with him a moment, in the dust, one voice against the whole world. Watch what happened to the city that laughed.
He was not a king.
He was not a general. He was the man who said, "Nineveh falls in a single night," and every ear that heard him counted him a fool. Because this was Nineveh. This was the capital of Assyria, the city drunk on the blood of every nation it had ever swallowed. Kings sent their daughters there, and their gold there, and their fear there. And here was one man, dust on his sandals, saying the whole thing comes down. In one night, not a war, not a siege that grinds for 10 years. One single night. I believe there is a reason this little book sat at the back of the Bible so long, unread and unpreached. It is a hard story. It is a story about a city that had it coming, and a God who kept the count. Come sit close now. Let me tell it the way it happened, because what happened to Nineveh is one of the strangest, most exact things in all of Scripture, and I have carried it a long time, waiting for the right night to tell it. This is that night. The man's name was Nahum, and the very first line of his book calls it what it was: the burden of Nineveh. Not the good news of Nineveh, not the song of Nineveh, the burden, a weight laid on a man's chest that he has to carry to the city and set down at its feet. Nahum saw the end of the strongest city in the world, and he wrote it down while those walls still stood tall enough to laugh at him. Every word he spoke had already been settled in heaven. He just had to say it out loud, where men could hear it and remember it later when the water came. Now, I am going to hold back exactly how it fell for a while, not to tease you, because the how is the whole miracle, and you have to walk up to it slow to feel it. Between you and me, that is the part that made my hands go still the first time I read it. So we start where the story starts, with the city itself, in all its terror and all its gold. And by the end, you will see it the way it happened. You will stand on that wall the night it broke. I promise you that. Slow down. This part matters. Come with me back about 700 years before Christ to the banks of the Tigris River, to a city so big, the old book of Jonah calls it a 3 days journey just to cross. Jonah 3 verse 3 says it plain. Nineveh was an exceeding great city. Say that word slow. Exceeding. It ran past the edge of what a man could picture. The walls rose up so thick and so wide that chariots could ride along the top of them abreast, side by side, wheel to wheel, like a road built up in the sky. Guard towers stood over the gates by the hundreds. I have sat with that picture a long time, and I still cannot make my mind hold all of it at once. And inside those walls, it was not just soldiers and stone, it was beauty. It was gardens hung with green, watered by canals. The Assyrians cut through the hills to bring the cool river water right into the king's own courtyard. Men digging in that ground in our own time, and I will come back to them, so hold that thought. Pulled up the ruins of palaces with rooms the size of a country church. This was the might of Assyria at its highest hour. The gardens, the canals, and the might of Assyria all gathered in one place. If you had stood at the foot of those gates as a traveler, you would have felt your own smallness go all the way down to your feet. Here is what I have come to believe. sitting with this on my own porch of an evening. A city like that does not think it can die. It has never lost. It has swallowed every neighbor, burned every rival, and the sun still comes up over its towers every morning like a servant who knows his place. Men in a city like that stop looking up. They stop believing there is anything higher than their own wall. And that, I believe, is the exact moment a thing becomes ripe to fall. Not when it is weak, when it is proudest. Nineveh was standing at the very top of the world. Sit with that a second. The top is a dangerous place to stand. Let me stop right here and tell you something true. My grandmother told Bible stories on the porch on Saturday nights, down near Macon, Georgia, and she told this kind of story: a proud city and a patient God, better than any man I ever heard stand in a pulpit. My grandfather preached on Sundays, but her telling stayed with me longer than any sermon he ever gave. She used to say, "The Lord is never in a hurry," and somehow that scared me more than if she had said he was angry. I am 68 years old now, sawdust still under my nails from the workshop out back, and I am only now understanding what she meant. Now I have to tell you the hard part, and I am not going to dress it up, because the Bible does not dress it up. Nahum looked at this beautiful, terrible city, and he called it one thing. Nahum 3, verse 1. Woe to the bloody city, the bloody city. That is what the prophet named it. And he named it that for a reason carved into the stone of Nineveh's own walls. The Assyrians were not simply conquerors. They were the cruelest empire the ancient world had yet seen. And they were proud of it. They carved their cruelty into their monuments on purpose, so that everyone who came after would look and be afraid. Their own kings left us the record. In the royal annals, the boasting histories the Assyrian kings had chiseled into their palace walls, they wrote down what they did to cities that dared resist. They wrote of flayed captives, of skins stripped from living men and hung on the walls of conquered towns. They wrote of heaps of heads piled at the city gates, of prisoners burned alive, of whole peoples marched off in chains. These are not the exaggerations of frightened enemies. This is Assyria, bragging in its own hand. Heaps of heads and flayed captives, written into the annals as an achievement to be proud of. Do you understand what kind of city we are standing in? Let that sink all the way down. This was terror used as state policy, not cruelty in a moment of rage. Cruelty is a plan. Cruelty is a tool of government meant to make every nation for 1,000 miles pay its tribute and keep its mouth shut. Break one city horribly and 10 cities surrender without a fight. That was the whole idea. That was how Nineveh kept the world on its knees. And it worked. For generation after generation, it worked. The nations paid, and the nations trembled, and the nations buried their dead and said nothing out loud. Nineveh had turned fear into a kind of throne, and it sat on that throne and believed it would sit there forever. Watch what happened to the city that laughed. Now here is where this stops being somebody else's history and starts touching people whose names God knew by heart. Because Assyria did not do all this far away, to strangers. In the year 722 before Christ, the Assyrian army came down on the northern kingdom of Israel, 10 of the 12 tribes, and the northern kingdom was carried off into exile. Carried off. Marched out of their own land in ropes and chains, scattered across the empire, most of them never to find their way home again. The soldiers who did that walked back through those chariot-wide gates as heroes, back to the gardens and the feasts, while the children of Israel wept beside foreign rivers. Most folks, when they read the prophets, they want the comforting ones. They want the green pastures and the still waters. And I understand that. I do. But I have come to believe you cannot understand the comfort until you have stood a while with the ones who needed it. There were mothers in those chains. There were old men who had planted olive trees they would never sit under again. And for years, heaven seemed silent. The cry of the oppressed was rising up, night after night, and the towers of Nineveh still stood, and the gardens still bloomed, and no fire fell from anywhere. If you have ever prayed a long time and heard nothing come back, you know the exact silence I am talking about. But silence is not the same thing as absence. Here is the truth. Nahum was sent to carry across all those miles. We serve a God who sees what empires do in the dark. Every heap of heads, every flayed man, every child marched off at the end of a rope. He saw it. He kept the count. And Nahum 1 verse 2 says it in words that ought to make a tyrant's blood run cold. God is jealous, and the Lord revengeth. He had not forgotten Nineveh. He had been watching Nineveh the whole time, and the day was coming, closer than anyone in that proud city could imagine, when the long account would finally be settled. In a single night. Slow down. We are getting there. So, who was he? Who was the man with the nerve to stand up and tell the strongest empire on earth that its days were numbered? The book gives us almost nothing about him, and I have come to believe that is on purpose. The very first verse, Nahum 1 verse 1, calls it the burden of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. That is nearly all we get. A burden, a vision, and one strange little word, Elkoshite, Nahum the Elkoshite. It means he came from a place called Elkoshite. And here is the thing that gets me every time. Nobody today knows for certain where Elkosh even was. It was a name from a forgotten village, so small that time swallowed it whole. I remember the first time that truly landed on me. I was a younger man then, reading in the front room with the lamp turned down low, and it stopped me cold. The city in this book is so famous that we still dig up its palaces and put them in museums. The man in this book is so obscure, we cannot even find his hometown on any map. And that, right there, is the whole shape of the story in a single line. A nobody standing against the greatest empire alive. No army behind him, no throne under him, no family name that opened doors. Just a word from God and the courage to carry it. I set the book down that night and sat a long while with how small he was and how the smallness was the point. Because that is how God works, over and over, all through the old book. He does not reach for the palace. He reaches for the shepherd boy with a sling. He reaches for the stutterer at the burning bush. He reaches for the young widow gleaning grain in a stranger's field. And here, when it is finally time to pronounce sentence on the terror of the whole earth, he does not send a king, and he does not send an army. He sends one man from a village nobody remembers. I believe there is a mercy hidden in that, and a warning folded in beside it. The mercy is that God can use anyone at all. The warning is that no wall is ever built high enough to keep his word out. Now Nahum opens his vision, not with the fall, but with a picture of the one who is doing the falling. And it is a picture that holds together two things most of us spend our lives trying to keep apart. Listen to Nahum 1 verse 3. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power. Slow to anger, great in power. Both at the very same time. We like to split those two. We want a God who is slow to anger and just leave it there, gentle as a summer morning. Or else we fear a God who is great in power and forget that he is patient. Nahum will not let us do either one. He says the same God is both, and that the slowness is not weakness. The slowness is mercy with a clock running quietly behind it. And then the prophet reaches for the biggest pictures he has. He says God has his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. Picture that with me. The storm that flattens the barn and bends the old oak double, that is just the dust kicked up where he happens to be walking. A verse before, in Nahum 1 verse 2, he calls him a jealous God and an avenging God. Now, jealous is a word that can trouble us, so let me say it plain, the way I have come to understand it. It does not mean petty. It means he will not share his people with the things that are devouring them. He is jealous for them the way a father is jealous over a child that somebody is hurting. So put the two halves together, because Nahum needs you to hold them both at once. Slow to anger. That is why Nineveh got 100 years and more of sunrises it never once deserved. Great in power. That is why, when the slowness finally ran out, one night was all it took. A jealous God and an avenging God. Patient as a long Georgia summer and sudden as lightning over the field. I have wrestled with this side of God my whole life, and where I have finally landed is this. The patience and the power are not two different gods. They are one God. And the same love that waited 100 years is the same love that finally moved. Sit with that a second. It changes how you read everything that comes next. So Nahum stands up and he speaks. And what he speaks is not a maybe. It is not someday, somehow. The mighty may perhaps be humbled. It is specific enough to be dangerous. It is the prophecy that the city would fall in a single night, that the drunkards would be devoured like stubble fully dry, that the gates of her rivers would be thrown open, that the palace itself would melt away. He named the manner of it. He all but named the very hour of it. And he did all of it standing in the long shadow of a wall that had never once been broken. Now, real talk, just between you and me. Put yourself down in that crowd. You are a farmer or a merchant. You have seen those Assyrian walls with your own two eyes. Maybe you have paid tribute to that empire your whole life long. And a man from a village you have never even heard of stands up and says it all comes crashing down in one single night. What do? You laugh. Of course you laugh. It is the mockery of a man against a wall that never fell. They would have called him mad. They would have called him a liar and worse. Some of them, I imagine, felt sorry for him the way you feel sorry for a fool who does not yet know that he is a fool. And honestly, part of me does not even blame them. Here is the tension you have to feel in your own chest to understand this whole book. An empire this strong cannot simply end. It goes against everything you think you know about how the world actually works. Big things do not fall in a night. Empires rot slow, over long centuries. Everybody knows that much. So the word Nahum carried was not just hard to believe. It was an offense to plain common sense. It asked people to bet against the one sure thing in their entire world. And I have come to believe that is exactly why God said it so plainly and so far ahead of time, so that when it happened just as he said it would, there would be no mistaking whose hand had done the thing. Slow down now, because now we have to walk up close to what they were laughing at. Come up close now, closer than is comfortable, because Nahum does. He does not let you study the city from a safe distance up on a hill. He walks you right down into its streets and makes you smell it. Nahum 3, verse 1. Woe to the bloody city! It is all full of lies and robbery, the prey departeth not. Sit with each piece of that. Full of lies, a city that ran on deceit, treaties made to be broken, promises that meant nothing the moment they left the king's mouth. Full of robbery, wealth that was never earned, but only taken. Gold pried out of the hands of weaker nations. And then, that terrible line at the end. The prey departeth not. The victims never stop coming. The hunting never ends. There is always another nation to devour, always another wagon of plunder rolling in through the gates. And then Nahum does something that still makes the hair stand up on my arms after all these years. In verse 2 and verse 3, he puts you right inside the sound of it. Listen, the noise of a whip and the noise of the rattling of the wheels. The whip and the rattling of the wheels. Can you hear it? The crack of the lash over the war horses, the iron wheels of the chariots screaming over the stone. The prancing horses, the jumping chariots. He is not handing you a history lesson. He is handing you a nightmare you can hear with your own ears. And in the middle of it, verse 3 again, a multitude of slain, and a great number of carcasses, and there is none end of their corpses. They stumble upon their corpses. There is no end to the plunder, and no end to the corpses. That is the picture the prophet paints. Bodies so many, the living stumble over them in the road. I have read that verse many, many times, and I have come to believe Nahum wrote it that way on purpose. So ugly, so crowded with the dead, because he wanted the reader to feel the exact weight of what this city had done. I have sat on my own porch of an evening with that one verse and had to lay the book down flat and just breathe a while, because this is not God gloating over ruin. This is God tallying. Every single one of those corpses was somebody's son, somebody's mother, somebody's whole world. And the God who is slow to anger had been counting them, every one. Slow down. That counting is the whole reason for what is coming. Now Nahum changes the picture, and this next image is one that people skip right over. So let me slow us down and sit on it a minute. In Nahum 3 verse 4, the prophet stops calling Nineveh a bloody city and starts calling it something else entirely. He calls it the well-favored harlot, the mistress of witchcrafts, that selleth nations through her whoredoms and families through her witchcrafts. The well-favored harlot. Well-favored means beautiful, attractive, pleasing to the eye. He is saying that this city, drowning in blood, was also, at the very same time, gorgeous, charming, dressed in gold and perfume. That is not a contradiction in the prophet's mind. That is the whole trick of the thing, because empires do not conquer the world by ugliness alone. They seduce it. Nahum says Nineveh was selling nations through her whoredoms and witchcrafts. She pulled the surrounding peoples in with promises, with trade, with the glamour of standing close to the strongest power on the earth. Come under our protection, send us your gold, and we will keep you safe. Wear our fashions, worship the way we worship, and you can stand near the throne of the whole world. And nation after nation fell for it, the same way a person falls for a beautiful lyre. By the time they saw the blood underneath the perfume, the chains were already fastened on. That is empire seduction. That is how terror dressed itself up as glory, so that the very cities it would one day crush lined up first just to admire it. And here is why I linger on this part. Because I have come to think it is the peace that reaches all the way across those centuries and touches us where we live. Evil that only ever looked like a monster would be easy. We would run from it in the daylight. The truly dangerous thing is evil that looks like glory. Evil with good lighting on it. Evil that throws a magnificent feast and pulls out a chair and invites you to sit down and eat. Nineveh was beautiful, and Nineveh was a slaughterhouse, and it was both of those at once. And the beauty is exactly what kept the world from seeing the slaughter until it was far too late. Nahum saw through all of it. That was his burden, to look at the most admired city on earth and see the harlot standing underneath the gold. Sit with that, then hold on to it tight, because judgment is coming, and it is coming for the paint just as surely as it is coming for the blood. Nahum's little book ends on a note that ought to stop us in our tracks. The very last verse, Nahum 3 verse 19, is not aimed at the reader at all. It is aimed straight at the king of Assyria, and it says this: "There is no healing of thy bruise, thy wound is grievous. All that hear the bruit of thee shall clap their hands over thee." All that hear shall clap their hands over thee. Now clapping we think of as applause, as gladness, as joy, and that is exactly what it means right here. But it is a terrible kind of joy. It is the sound of every nation that Nineveh ever crushed, hearing the news at last that the butcher is dead, and clapping right there in the street. Now most teachers, when they get to this verse, they want to hurry right past it because it makes us uncomfortable. All those hands clapping over a city's ruin, it sounds cruel to our ears. But I have come to read it differently over the years, and I want to be honest with you about that. That clapping is not petty spite. That is the bruise that has no healing, finally being answered. Think about who is doing the clapping. It is the mother whose sons were marched off in ropes and never came home. It is the village that was burned to the ground to teach the next village a lesson. It is the long memory of everyone Nineveh ever terrorized. Every people who buried their dead in silence and lay awake wondering if God was even awake himself. For them, that news is not cruelty. It is the first full breath they have drawn in 100 years. Let me be honest about where I sit with this. For a long time, verses like that one embarrassed me. I wanted a Bible that was all forgiveness and no reckoning. And I used to read right over the hard parts, fast. The way you walk fast past something you would rather not look at. Della, my wife, she used to say the saddest stories are the ones told fastest. And she was right about that. The way she was right about most things. It took me getting old and burying people I loved to finally understand that a God who never once reckoned with evil would not actually be good. He would just be absent. My grandmother knew that truth on her porch in Georgia long before I ever caught up to it. So hold both of these things in your two hands as we go on. The judgment falling on Nineveh is a horror, and you should feel it as a horror. And the judgment falling on Nineveh is, for 100 grieving nations, the answer to 100 years of prayer. Both of those are true at once. Nahum makes us feel the terror of this city and the justice of its fall in the very same breath, and he will not let us walk away with one and leave the other. There is no healing of thy bruise. The wound Nineveh gave the world was deep, and now the wound Nineveh receives will be final. Slow down, friend, because the prophet has already told us how it comes. And it is stranger than anyone in that proud, laughing city could ever have dreamed. Here is where the story turns strange. And I mean strange in a way that made the men who first heard it shake their heads. Because when Nahum finally tells how this fortress will fall, he does not reach for what you would expect. He does not say a greater army will outfight them. He does not say famine will starve them out. Listen to Nahum 1 verse 8. But with an overrunning flood, he will make an utter end of the place thereof. An overrunning flood, water, that is the weapon the prophet names. With an overrunning flood, he will make an utter end. And I want you to feel how odd that is, because the people who first heard it certainly did. Think about it. This is a fortress city, a city built to stand against every kind of siegeman had ever invented. Battering rams, tunnels, ladders, starvation, treachery. They had defenses against all of it. And the prophet stands up and says, none of that is how it ends. It ends with a flood. It is the strangeness of a water prophecy spoken over a fortress city, and it would have sounded almost foolish to a soldier's ears. Walls do not fear water. Stone does not drown. A man on that wall would have laughed and said, let it rain, old man. We have stood 1,000 years in the rain. And yet Nahum says it plainly, an overrunning flood, an utter end. And that is what has kept me up at night over this book, if I am being honest with you. Because this was a picture spoken years before the water ever came. Nahum did not describe a flood he was watching happen. He described a flood that had not happened yet, in a way so specific that when it finally did happen, the people who remembered his words must have felt the ground move under them. I have come to believe that is the whole reason God gives a prophecy its details. Not to satisfy our curiosity, but so that on the far side of it, when every strange word has come true, there is no one left who can call it luck. Sit with how bold that is, to name the manner of a thing before the thing exists. Now Nahum gets more specific still, and this is the verse that turns the whole book like a key in a lock. Nahum 2 verse 6. The gates of the rivers shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved. Read that again slow. The gates of the rivers shall be opened, not the gates of the city, the gates of the rivers. Nineveh sat where two rivers met, the great Tigris and a smaller river called the Kosser running through it. And the city had built works to hold those waters back and channel them where they wanted them. Nahum says those river gates will be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved, melted, washed away like a thing made of clay left out in the storm. Now stop and ask the honest question that any thinking person asks right here. How can rising water take down a wall of stone? How does a river bring low a fortress that armies could not touch? It sounds impossible on its face. And I will tell you the truth. For centuries, readers wondered the very same thing. They read the gates of the rivers shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved. And they could not picture the mechanism of it. It stayed a riddle, a strange, specific riddle sitting there in the middle of an old book, waiting for the day when men digging in the dirt would finally understand exactly what Nahum had seen. Because here is the thing about a prophecy like this one. It does not have to make sense to the man who first hears it. It only has to make sense to the man who lives to see it. Nahum spoke of opened river gates and a dissolving palace to a generation that could not have told you how such a thing would work. He did not soften it to make it more believable. He did not trade the flood for an army just so the crowd would nod along. He said the strange, exact, impossible-sounding thing, and he let it stand. And I have come to believe that takes a particular kind of faith, the kind that trusts the word more than it trusts the laughter. Slow down now, because we are almost to the wall, and the water is already rising in the dark, where no one is looking yet. And Nahum does not stop with the water. He piles the details higher, one on top of another, until the whole ending of the city stands finished in his words before a single stone has fallen. Listen to Nahum 3, verse 15. There shall the fire devour thee.
There shall the fire devour thee.
So now, alongside the flood, there is fire. Water and fire, The two things you would think could never work together, both named as the undoing of Nineveh. The sword shall cut thee off, he says. It shall eat thee up like the cankerworm. Flood, fire, and sword, all in one breath. All promised over a city that at that very hour was feasting behind walls no army could climb. And then comes the picture that I think is the loneliest in the whole book. Nahum 2 verse 10. She is empty and void and waste, and the heart melteth, and the knees smite together. Empty and void and waste. Say those three words slow, one at a time, because Nahum chose three where one would do, and he did it to make you feel the silence. Empty, void, waste. The garden's gone, the feast's gone, the chariot's gone, the king's gone. Just wind moving through rooms where the terror of the whole earth used to sit and count its gold. That is the whole ending, painted in advance, hanging there in the book, like a portrait of a funeral for someone still alive and laughing. And notice what the prophet does to the men themselves in that same verse. The heart melteth, and the knees smite together. He does not just tear down the walls in his vision. He goes inside the chest of the mighty man and shows him afraid. The heart melts. The knees knock one against the other, the way a strong man's legs will do when the fear gets bigger than the man. Think of who these were. The soldiers of the cruelest army the ancient world had yet seen. The ones who wrote of flayed men as an achievement. And Nahum sees the day their own hearts turned to water. Not because they got soft, because they finally stood in front of something bigger than they were. And I have come to believe there is a warning in that, for every proud heart, mine included. The strongest thing you have built will not steady your knees on the night the Lord finally speaks. Only the one who is a stronghold can do that. Sit with it. Now let me speak to you plainly for a moment, friend, the way I would if you were sitting right here on the porch with me. If this old story is reaching you, if you feel the weight of it settling on you the way it settles on me, do one thing. Tell somebody. Share it with one person who needs to hear that God keeps the count, that the proud thing does not stand forever, that justice is slow, but it is not asleep. Just one. That is all. Because I have come to believe stories like this one were never meant to be kept. They were meant to be handed down, porch to porch, hand to hand, the way my grandmother handed them to me. And I want to be honest with you about something as we stand here at the edge of it. Part of me still finds it hard to hold. To read a man name the fire and the flood and the emptiness, years early, down to the manner of it. But there it is, written plain, and the night is coming when every word of it comes true. Slow down. This part matters more than any other, because now the armies are on the road. Now the years roll on. Nahum has spoken, and the word sits waiting, and the towers of Nineveh still catch the morning sun. But out beyond the horizon, in lands the Assyrians thought they had beaten down for good, something is stirring. The empire has made too many enemies over too many centuries, and enemies have long memories. To the east, the Medes are rising, a fierce mountain people. To the south, in Babylon, a king named Nabopolassar has thrown off Assyria's chain and is looking north with fire in his eye. And then, the thing Nineveh never feared happens. They join hands. The Medes and the Babylonians in coalition against Assyria, two old enemies of the empire deciding they hate Nineveh more than they mistrust each other. We can put a year on it now, and that is a gift the old book did not have. The year is 612 before Christ, and it is closing in like weather you can feel in your knees before you see it in the sky. For 3 years, the coalition has been chipping at Assyria's edges, taking its lesser cities, tightening the circle. And now they turn toward the heart of it, toward Nineveh herself, toward the walls the world swore could never fall. Picture the roads north choked with men and horses and the long, ugly machines of siege. Picture the dust of them rising for miles. And picture, up on those famous walls, the Assyrian soldiers looking out and telling each other what men on high walls always tell each other. Let them come. Nobody takes this city. Nobody ever has. And here is the thing I have to sit with every time I get to this part of the telling. They were right, in a way. History was on their side. Nineveh really had never been taken by force. Those walls really were the wonder of the age, wide enough for the chariots up top, backed by 100 feet of packed earth, ringed by a moat, studded with towers. By every measure a soldier trusts, that city should have held. The Medes and Babylonians could camp outside those walls until they grew old and gray. I have come to believe that is exactly what made the mockery of Nahum feel so safe for so long. When your walls have never failed, a prophet's word about a flood sounds like a fairy tale you tell to frighten children. But Nahum had already seen this army coming. Go back and read Nahum 2 verse 3 and 2-4, and it is as if the prophet is standing on the wall, watching them arrive. The shield of his mighty men is made red, the valiant men are in scarlet. The chariots shall be with flaming torches in the day of his preparation. The chariots shall rage in the streets. They shall jostle one against another in the broad ways. They shall seem like torches. They shall run like the lightnings. The chariots shall rage in the streets. He saw the scarlet of the attackers. He saw the torchlight and the wheels. He saw war come inside the city, into the very streets and broad ways where the merchants used to sell. And he saw the defense fall apart too, which is the harder thing to see. Nahum 2 verse 5. He shall recount his worthies. They shall stumble in their walk. They shall make haste to the wall thereof, and the defense shall be prepared. Read that close. The mighty men stumble in their walk. The great warriors of Assyria, the terror of the earth, and Nahum sees them stumbling, tripping over their own feet in the panic. He sees them making haste to the wall, scrambling up to man the defenses. The defenders scrambling to the wall, too late, too shaken, the confidence of 1,000 years draining out of them in a single terrible hour. The prophet saw the panic before the panic had a reason to exist. Now, stop with me here, because this is one of those places where the details ought to give a person the chills. Nahum wrote of scarlet shields and raging chariots and stumbling warriors long before the Medes and Babylonians ever marched. He described the color of the coming army. He described the chaos in the streets. He described the defenders scrambling and stumbling on the wall. And I want to be careful how I say this, because I am not here to prove anything to you that you have to take on my word alone. But when I read the prophet describe a battle in that kind of detail, and then read the history books describe the same battle centuries later, something in me goes very quiet. Slow down, because the trap is almost shut, and the thing that springs it is not an army at all. So the coalition arrives and the siege begins. And at first, it goes just the way the Assyrians on the wall expected it to go. The attackers cannot get in. The walls hold, the way they had always held. By the ancient accounts that have come down to us, the siege dragged on for roughly 3 months. And for most of that time, Nineveh endured it the way it had endured every trial before. The defenders manned the towers. The city ate from its stores. The proud held their heads high and waited for the enemy to lose heart and go home, because that is what enemies had always eventually done. 3 months, and the great city still stood, and no doubt the mockery of Nahum's old words felt safer than ever. But something was happening in those months that no soldier on the wall was watching for. It was the season of the rains, and up in the hills where the Tigris and the Kosser are born, the rains that year came heavy, and the rivers began to swell. Slowly at first, a little higher against the banks each day. The Tigris and the Kosser swelling with the heavy rains, gathering weight and speed in the dark, pressing harder and harder against the very works the city had built to control them. And nobody sounded an alarm, because nobody feared the water. They feared the men outside the wall. They kept their eyes on the scarlet shields and the raging chariots, and the real enemy came rising up quietly underneath their own feet. Let me stop the story right here, because I have to be honest with you, and this is the part I got wrong for the longest time. For years, when I told this story to my grandchildren on the porch in the summer, I told this part fast. I rushed the rain. I wanted to get to the big crash. The wall coming down, the fire, the ending everybody waits for. It took me getting old and losing Della to understand why my grandmother always slowed down right here instead. Because this quiet stretch, the rain nobody noticed, the river rising in the dark, while the whole city watched the wrong direction. This is where the real lesson lives. I used to think judgment came like a shout. Now, I have come to believe it comes far more often like a slow rain, patient and unhurried, gathering weight for years while the proud keep watching the wrong horizon. That frightens me more than any thunderclap ever could, because I have watched things fall that way in my own long life. Not with a bang, with a rising nobody was counting. And so, the trap was quietly closing around the city, and the men inside it never felt it tightening. Everything Nahum had named was gathering into one place at one time. The Scarlet Army outside the wall, the fire waiting in the torches, and the water, the strange water the prophet had spoken of years before, rising higher against the river gates with every hour of rain. The city was watching a siege. God was writing an ending, and the two things were about to meet on a single night, in a way no defender had prepared for, in a way no army could have forced, in a way that would leave no room to call it luck or accident or the ordinary fortunes of war. Slow down, take a breath, because the next thing that happens is the thing this whole book was written to show you. It is night over Nineveh. Picture it with me now, the way it happened. The torches of the enemy burning out beyond the moat, the tired defenders on the wall, and below them, where the river runs against the city, the water is not resting. The rains have done their patient work up in the hills, and now the river comes down swollen far past. Its banks in the night, black and heavy, and faster than any man has seen it in a lifetime. It climbs, it presses, foot by foot, it rises against the stone, and no torch is turned that way, and no watchman calls it out, because who in all the world fears a river? Rivers are servants. Rivers have always known their place. But this river has an appointment. Every hour, the pressure keeps building against the great river wall, that mighty stretch of stone and packed earth where the Tigris and the Kosser are meant to be held and channeled and tamed. The waters shove against it with the weight of a whole rain-soaked mountain range behind them. The stone groans. The old works strain, and somewhere in the dark, deep in the foundations that 1,000 years of pride were resting on, something begins to give. The city sleeps, or tries to. The feast goes on in the palace, and the water keeps rising, keeps pushing, keeps looking for the one weak place, the way water always does. And now hear the word again, the word Nahum spoke into the empty air. How many years before this night? Nahum 2 verse 6. The gates of the rivers shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved, the gates of the rivers shall be opened. Not by the enemy's hand, not by a battering ram or a tunnel, or a traitor with a key, by the river itself, come to keep an appointment made in heaven before any of these men were born. Understand what is happening here, because it is the hinge of the whole story. The one defense Nineveh never thought to guard, the river it had bent to its own will for centuries, is turning. The servant is rising against the master, and the prophet had named it, named the very manner of it, and the men on the wall had laughed. And now the laughing is almost over. I want you to sit in that darker moment with me before the crash comes, because it is a holy and a terrible thing to stand at. All the might of Assyria, all the chariots, all the annals, all the heaps of heads, and the flayed men, and the nations sold like cattle, all of it resting on stone. And against that stone, in the black of one night, a rising river carrying the patience of 100 years of prayers. The city does not know it yet. The city thinks the danger is the army it can see. But the danger was always the word it could not silence. Slow down, because now the stone gives way. And think, just for a breath, of the ones inside the palace that night, because I cannot tell this part without seeing their faces. There were servants in there, and children, and old men who had lived their whole lives believing that war was the one sure thing in an unsure world. There were soldiers who had been told since boyhood that Nineveh does not fall, that the gods of Assyria would never let her fall. And the lamps are lit, and the wine is poured, and out beyond the light, the water is doing the one thing they were sure it could never do. That is the terror of a false certainty, friend. It does not just fail you, it fails you in the dark, all at once, at the very hour you felt safest. I have watched proud men rest their whole weight on things that could not hold, and it never once ended gently. There is a sound that night that Nineveh had never heard in all its long and bloody history. Deep and low, and then rising into a roar. A long section of the impregnable wall gives way. The wall that chariots rode along. The wall that armies broke themselves against. The wall the whole world swore could never fall. It comes apart under the weight of the water, a great ragged mouth torn open in the stone, and through that mouth the river pours in like judgment given a body. Water roaring through the streets in the dark, down the broad ways where the merchants sold, through the markets, into the fine houses. Rising in the very streets Nahum had seen the chariots rage through. Only now it is not chariots, it is the flood, taking the city street by street. And here is the thing that ought to stop your heart. The impossible thing was made suddenly real. All those centuries, readers had asked how rising water could ever bring down a wall of stone. And here, in one roaring night, was the answer, written not in ink now, but in the ruin itself. The thing that could not happen was happening. The fairy tale the soldiers laughed at was drowning them in their beds. I have sat with this a long time, and I still feel the awe of it settle on me every time. Because this is the moment the word became the world. The moment the burden Nahum carried up to that gate, dust on his sandals, came true down to the manner of it. Nineveh is filling with water in the dark, and there is no army on earth, and no wall, and no god of Assyria that can push it back out. Slow down, it is not finished yet, and while the water climbs through the streets below, up in the palace, the other half of Nahum's word is coming true. Remember the rest of that verse. Nahum 2 verse 6. The gates of the rivers shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved. The palace shall be dissolved. Now those great Assyrian palaces were built of mud brick, faced with stone, raised up on mighty platforms. And mud brick has one enemy above all others: water. As the flood undermines the foundations and soaks into the great platforms, the palace begins to do the very thing the prophet said. It dissolves. It slumps. It melts from underneath, the proudest house on earth turning back toward the mud it was made from. And into that chaos comes the fire. The enemy is at the breach now, pouring through the broken wall behind the water, and the torches Nahum saw are doing their work. Fire and water taking the city together, the two of them, the flood in the streets and the flames in the halls, exactly the pairing the prophet had named when he said, in one place an overrunning flood, and in another there shall the fire devour thee. You would think water and fire could never destroy a city on the same night. On this night, they do. The old records tell us that in the end, when all was clearly lost, the king of Assyria would not be taken alive to be paraded in chains. So he gathered his household and his treasure into the palace, and the king and his house were consumed in the flames. The fire and the flood closing over the throne of the world at once. Picture the last hours of it, if your heart can hold the picture. The proudest house on earth going soft in its own foundations, the great carved bulls at the gates lit orange by fire, the water black in the streets, and the flames gold in the towers, and over all of it, the screaming and the smoke, and the roar of a river that would not be turned back. The men who had marched other nations off in ropes were themselves running now, and there was nowhere to run to, because the wall that had kept the world out was now the wall that kept them in with the flood. Everything they had done to others was coming home in a single night. I do not tell you that with any joy. I tell you it the way my grandmother told it, quiet, so you feel the weight, because this is what the end of cruelty looks like when God himself finally writes the last line. Now stand still with me in the ashes of that morning, because I want you to feel the full weight of what has just happened. It was over in a single night, exactly as the prophet said. Not a 10-year war, not a slow starving. One night, the city that had never fallen in 1,000 years was gone by sunrise, drowned and burned and dissolved, and the terror of every nation on earth was a smoking ruin along the river. And somewhere, I have to believe, there were old men and women among the survivors of the world who remembered, who had heard years before about a man from a village nobody could find who said this very thing would happen in just this very way. And the laughter of the mockers was silenced forever. Every man who had laughed at Nahum in the gate, if he lived to this night, was not laughing now. Hear one more word, because Nahum spoke it, and this night proved it. Nahum 1 verse 9. What do ye imagine against the Lord? He will make an utter end. Affliction shall not rise up the second time. Affliction shall not rise up the second time. And it never did. That is the part that finishes me. Nineveh did not fall and then rise again a generation later, the way great cities so often do. It fell, and it stayed fallen, and it did not rise a second time. The affliction that had crushed the nations for centuries was made an utter end of. In one night, by a rising river, the whole city had forgotten to fear. I have come to believe that is what Nahum wanted us to see more than anything. Not just that the wicked fall, that when God finally moves, he makes an utter end, and the terror does not come back. Slow down, friend, because the morning after is its own kind of miracle, and it is waiting for us next. The sun comes up on the day after, and it comes up on a silence the world had not known in centuries. Where the loudest city on earth had stood, there is only water going down and smoke going up, and the wind moving over broken stone. And Nahum had a word even for this morning. Nahum 3 verse 7. Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? Whence shall I seek comforters for thee? Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? Who will mourn her? Who will weep? And the terrible answer folded into the question is, nobody. There was not one voice left to mourn the terror of the earth. A city that had made 1,000 widows had no one to weep at her own funeral. I have to be honest with you about this morning, because it is not a simple thing to feel. There is the silence where the loudest city had stood, and part of me stands in that silence and shivers. All those people, all that beauty, the gardens and the canals and the palaces with rooms like churches, gone under the mud in a night. I do not celebrate that the way you cheer a ball game. I have buried enough people to know that ruin is ruin, even the ruin of the wicked. And yet there is another thing in that silence, if you listen for it. It is peace. For the first time in 100 years, the road out of 100 conquered towns does not lead to a slave market in Nineveh. The butcher's shop is closed, and the quiet that hangs over those ruins is the quiet of a world that can finally exhale. Now here is where the story does something I did not expect. The first time I really studied it, and it is the reason I trust this book the way I do. For a very long time, Nineveh was so utterly gone that the world forgot it had ever been real. For centuries, scholars doubted Nineveh ever existed at all. It became a name in an old book, a legend, a thing skeptics pointed to and said, "See, the Bible tells tall tales. There is no such city. There never was." The greatest city of its age had vanished so completely that learned men laughed at the idea it had stood. Do you feel the strange justice in that? The city that laughed at Nahum was itself laughed at, treated as a fable, its very existence denied by the wise men of a later age. And then, the dirt gave up its secret. In the 1840s, along the Tigris across from the town of Mosul, a man named Austin Henry Layard began to dig into two great mounds the local people called by old names, and one of them was the mound of Kuyunjik. Layard and the excavations of the 1840s pulled a lost world up out of the ground. Palace walls, winged stone bulls, taller than a house, and chamber after chamber lined with those very annals I told you about. The Assyrian kings boasting in carved stone of their conquests and their cruelties. The mounds of Kuyunjik, across from Mosul, gave back the buried city, and the legend stood up out of the earth and proved it had been flesh and blood and stone all along. Think about what those diggers were reading, down there in the lamplight, brushing the dirt of 25 centuries off the walls. The very boasts I read you earlier, the flayed men, the heaps of heads. The cities burned to frighten the next city into silence. Every cruel word Nahum had answered, carved right there in the stone by the hands that did it, waiting all that time in the dark to be found. It is one thing to read the prophet, call it the bloody city. It is another thing entirely to stand in the ruins and read the city, admit it in its own hand. The witness for the prosecution and the confession of the guilty were pulled out of the same ground, and they agreed. I have come to believe there are few things in all the study of Scripture as sobering as that. But it was not only the city they found, it was the ending. Because when the diggers reached down into the ruins of those great palaces, they found ash layers and a burnt palace matching the words, "The black scorch of a great fire baked into the very bricks." They found the marks of the flood. They found a city that had been destroyed by fire and water together and then abandoned, never truly rebuilt. Just as the prophet said, affliction not rising up a second time, empty, void, and waste, confirmed in the ruins, exactly the three words Nahum had chosen. The dirt agreed with the prophet, detail for detail. Centuries after both the prophet and the city were dust. And do not miss what did not happen there, because the silence is part of the proof. Great cities almost never stay dead. Rome fell, and Rome still stands. Babylon was leveled and rose again. But Nineveh, that terror of the whole earth, went down in one night and simply never got up. It became a pair of grassy mounds that shepherds walked their flocks across without knowing what slept underneath. Affliction did not rise up the second time, and I keep landing in the same place. When a man makes an end of a thing, it is never quite the end. When God makes an utter end of a thing, it stays ended. And that is the thing I want to leave sitting in your hands from this part of the telling. It was the little book that told the truth, centuries early. A short prophecy from a man out of a forgotten village, tucked away at the back of the Bible, easy to skip. And it named the manner of a great city's fall, the flood, the fire, the dissolving palace, the utter and permanent end, before any of it came to pass. Then it waited, patient as its God, through the long centuries, while men called it a fable. And then the ground itself rose up as a witness and said, "No, it happened. It happened just this way." I have come to believe you do not get many mornings like that in this life, when the dust of the earth stands up to defend the word of God. Slow down, because there is one thing left to say, and it is the reason I told you all of this at all. So now, at the very end, let me give you the one thing I held back the whole way. Because there is the one revelation held to the very end. The reason I sat you down and told you all of this, it is not mainly that Nineveh was cruel, though it was. It is not mainly that the walls were high, or that the river was strange, though they were. It is this: every wicked kingdom, no matter how high its walls, no matter how long it has stood, no matter how loud it laughs at the man in the gate, every wicked kingdom meets its night. Not always soon, not always in the year we would choose, but it comes. The proud thing does not stand forever. That is the burden Nahum carried, and it is a burden that is also, strangely, a comfort. And if you are still sitting here with me, at the end of a long telling, I want to speak something straight to you, friend, the way my grandmother would have on that Georgia porch. You may be watching some proud and cruel thing in your own life, in your own family, in your own time, that seems like it will never come down. And you have prayed, and the walls still stand, and the towers still catch the morning sun, and heaven has seemed silent a long while. I have been in that silence. I sat in it hard the years after Della passed. Here is what Nineveh taught me, and I believe it with everything in me. The silence is not the absence. He is keeping the count. He is slow, and he is patient. And one day, in his own hour, he makes an utter end. And now hear the tenderest thing in the whole book, because Nahum does not leave us only with ruin. Right in the middle of all that thunder, he stops and says this. Nahum 1 verse 7. The Lord is good, a strong hold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. The same book that drowns Nineveh calls God a stronghold for the ones who trust him. And here is the part that finishes me every time. The name Nahum itself means comfort. Comfort. Judgment and comfort bound up in one little book, one prophet, one name. The judgment falls on the cruel, and the comfort rises over the ones who waited. They are not two different stories. They are the same hand. Now let me be plain and humble with you before we close, the way an honest man should be. What I have told you tonight is one reading of the text, not a prophetic word of my own, and not a claim about any city or nation of our own day. Scripture invites us into the story. What you saw tonight is one telling of it, and the text is deeper than any retelling this old carpenter could ever give you. So take it to your own Bible and read Nahum for yourself, all 3 short chapters, and see what the Lord shows you. And when you are done, comment the story you want told next, because I have got a whole porch full of them. If this one reached you, leave me just one word down below. Leave one word. Told. Just so I know you were here and you heard it. Let me pray us out. Father, we thank you for a justice that sees and a mercy that shelters, for the God who kept the count over Nineveh and keeps it still, and who is a stronghold to every soul that trusts you in the day of trouble. We thank you that you are slow to anger, and we thank you that you are great in power, and we ask that we would learn to trust both. For everyone watching who is waiting on a wall to come down, I speak a blessing of strength over you tonight. Hold on, he has not forgotten. And to every one of you, I say this: now you have seen it the way it happened. Walk in peace and walk covered. Amen. One last thing before you go. This is how I read scripture, not a prophetic word. I quote from the King James Version unless I say otherwise. If you read it differently, I want to hear it. Drop your thought in the comments.